Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Anim Klesha. So in last chapter of Jobless Reincarnation we saw how Rudius was born and how he realized that this is a different world where magic and sword is a common thing, and he thought to himself that he could live a normal life if it's this world. So before we get into the next video, please press that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and let's get into the chapter number 2, Expressionless Maid. Lilia was once a guard maid of Asura concubines. A guard maid is a maid who is also a guard. Guard maids will usually do the maid jobs, but if anything happens, they will take up the sword to protect their master. Lilia faithfully accomplished her duty. As far as her work was concerned as a maid, there were no complaints. But as a sword fighter, her ability was average, a dime in a dozen. And thus, she got careless in a battle against the assassin who targeted the newly born princess, and she got injured in the leg by the enemy's dagger. The dagger was coated with the poison, which was specifically meant to kill the royalty. There were no antidotes or the healing magic that was capable of treating such a calamitous poison. The wound was immediately treated and she survived thanks to a doctor trying a variety of methods to cure her, but there were side effects that lingered. There was no problems caused to her everyday life, but she could never run or stomp again. The kingdom selected her without hesitation. It wasn't an uncommon theme, and Lilia accepted her fate herself. Having lost her abilities, it was a given that she would lose her position. Even though she wasn't given compensation money, she still considered it fortunate that she wasn't secretly silenced because she served in the inner palace. Lilia left the capital. The mastermind behind the assassination attempt was not found. Having understood the rules of the concubine's staff, she knew that the possibility she might become the next target. Perhaps the palace let the Lilia vendor to leave to lure out the mastermind. She always wondered why she, who had no significant background, had been accepted in the inner palace. It was now that she finally understood. They simply wanted to hire the maids who could be used and discarded. No matter the reason, however, she had to leave the capital as soon as possible for her own safety. Even though the kingdom treated her as a maid, she had no obligation to stay as she was not ordered to in any way, and she has no sense of duty to fulfill. Lilia switched stage coaches and arrived at Fedora region, which had extensive agricultural lands located at the border. It was a relaxing place of vast wheat fields with the exception of the fortress city Roa, where the ruler lived. Lilia intended to find the work there, but she was injured in the leg. She was unable to find a job that required strength. She could at least teach swordmanship, but it was best for her to be hired as a maid because the salary was higher. At this border, there were many who could yield a sword, who could teach swordmanship, but a maid thoroughly versed in the domestic affairs were relatively uncommon. Since the supply was little, the salary would increase. However, it was dangerous for her to be hired by the ruler of Fedora or any high-class nobility of similar status. Such people would surely have relations with the king. If they knew she was a maid who once worked in the concubine palace, there was a possibility she would be treated as a political tool. And for that reason, Lilia stayed far away. She didn't want to experience a near-death situation ever again. Even though it was a little unfair to the princess, Lilia hoped to stay far away from the royal contention for power. But if her salary was too low, there wouldn't be enough money to send to her family. Trying to find a safe job and guaranteed salary wasn't easy. After running around everywhere for a month, Lilia came across a recruitment note. A lower class knight of Bunia village, located in the Fedora region, was looking to hire a maid. On top of that, the note said he would give a special priority to someone with experience in taking care of the children or who had knowledge of midwifery. Bunia was a tiny village on the edge of Fedora, a village among villages, an extremely rural village. It was very inconvenient, but this is the place that she sought. The employer was a lower class knight, was also an unexpected fine find. And most importantly, she recognized the prospective employer's name. Paul Garrett. She was Lilia's protege, a noble's profligate son who, on one day, suddenly burst into the dojo where Lilia was learning swordsmanship. According to him, he had left home after a quarrel with his father and had come to the dojo to learn the swordsmanship. Albeit a different style, he too did study swordsmanship at home and soon after surpassed Lilia. Lilia was not amused by this fact, but she had soon understood that she had no talent and gave up. Paul, who had utterly brimming with talent, was banished from the dojo after making a mistake. He only left Lilia with a single sentence: "I'm becoming an adventurer, a man like a tempest." It was 7 years since they went their separate ways. At that time, he had actually become a knight and gotten married. Although she didn't know what sort of hurdles he had experienced in his life, Paul wasn't a bad guy as far as Lilia could remember. If she told him about her problems, she was sure he would help her. If that didn't work out, then she would mention past events. There were always a few things that she could use to negotiate. Having contemplated all these factors and headed to Punya, Paul employed Lilia without any fuss. It seemed he was really anxious as his wife Janet was about to give a birth. Lilia had been fully taught in the midwifery for the prince's birth. Moreover, she was someone he was acquainted with who knew of his background. Lilia was received with a warm welcome. Her salary was also more than what she had expected, and so her wish was achieved. The child was born. There weren't any labor issues or anything. It went just as she was trained for the inner palace. There were no problems at all. It was very successful. However, the child didn't cry when he was born. Lilia broke into the cold sweat. The baby sucked out the amniotic fluids immediately after he was born, but he merely lifted his head up without any emotion and made no sounds. The expressionless face was a reminiscent of a stillborn child. Lilia touched the baby and he had a heartbeat. He was breathing too, but he just wasn't crying. Lilia remembered the words of the senior guard maid that babies who don't cry at birth usually have complications. The instant when she thought of this, huh, huh, the baby looked over to her and mumbled something in his grogginess. Lilia relaxed after hearing that. Even though there was no evidence for it, she felt there should be no problems. The child's name was to be the Rudius. He was the uncanny child, never crying or fussing. At first, she assumed this baby was slightly weaker or taking care of him would require much effort, but such a notion only appeared at the beginning. After Rudius learned how to crawl, he started to move everywhere in the house. Everywhere in the house: kitchen, back door, storage, cleaning equipment, place, fireworks, fireplaces, etc. He even climbed onto the second story, though one couldn't imagine how he did so. Either way, he would disappear when nobody kept an eye on him. But he would be found somewhere in the house. Rudius never left the house. He would occasionally look outside the windows. It seemed he was still scared to go outdoors. Lilia was instinctively afraid of this baby, and one had to wonder, when did it begin? There was probably the moment when she found him after his disappearance. Most of the time, Rudius would be smiling. Sometimes he would be looking at vegetables, staring at the flickering candle flames, or just looking at the panties that were yet to be washed. Rudius mumbled sounds and shoved a smile that made people feel disgusted. It was a smile that naturally disgusted people. When Lilia was working in the inner palace, she had to go to the main palace for her missions, or the higher ranked official nobles that she met there had similar smiles. They were bald and had pudgy bellies and were leering at her when they stared at her breast, similar to a baby who was born not too long ago. It was exceptionally scary when she had to carry Rudius. His nostril would flare, the corners of his mouth would rise, and his breathing hastens as he buried his face into her chest. And then he would make strange noises, seemingly laughing as he made this sound. At that instant, Lilia's whole body was dominated with a terrible shivering cold, and she has the urge to throw the baby and smash him on the ground. The baby was not cute in any way. The smile caused the fears in others. The same smile the high ranking officials had when they brought the many young female slaves. He was supposed to be a baby who was just born. Lilia felt unbearable discomfort and even experienced feelings of peril. Lilia thought things over. This baby was very strange. Could there be could there be that there was something bad possessing it? Or was it something similar like a curse? Having thought this through, she started to feel extremely anxious. She went to the item shop and spent a pitiful money to buy some necessary things. When the Gyrants went to sleep, she did her home rituals to chase the evil away. Of course, this was kept from Paul and his family. The second day after carrying Rodius again, Lily understood it was useless, and he was still as disgusting as usual. It was eerie that a baby would show such an expression. Janice said, when feeding this baby milk, he would lick. This had become outrageous. Paul had no resistance when it comes to Bowen, but never was he so disgusting to this extent. This was too strange to be dismissed as hereditary. Lilia remembered again. She had heard of a story in the palace. In the past, an Asuran princess was possessed by a demon. To revive that demon, he would crawl around on his limbs every night. And when an unsuspecting maid hugged him, the prince stabbed her with a knife hidden behind him, killing her. It was too scary. Is Rudius something like that? There was no doubt. He was that kind of devil. He is still obedient for now, but one day he will awaken, and when everyone is asleep, one by one he'll. It's too early. It's too early to decide this. I shouldn't have taken this job. I'll get attacked sooner or later. Lilia was a person who seriously believed in such superstition. During the first year of her work, she was still afraid of him. But she didn't know when Rudius' unpredictable movements started to change. He didn't disappear as and when he wanted and usually stayed in Paul's study on the second floor. Speaking of the study, it was just a room with a few books. Rudius stayed there without leaving. Lilia secretly observed him and found him mumbling to himself while reading a book. It was a meaningless mumble, or was supposed to be, at least, for it wasn't a commonly used language in the central continents. It was still too early for him to be learning how to talk. Of course, he had yet to be taught alphabets. He was just an infant looking at the book and making random sounds, or it would just be too strange. Lilia always had a feeling that those sounds carried meaning and structure. Rudius seemed to understand the contents of the book. It was too frightening. Lilia always thought that when she observed Rudius from the gap in the door jamb, however, she never felt disgusted with him for some inexplicable reason. Come to think of it, that unknown source of discomfort gradually disappeared from the moment he confined himself to that room. Though he occasionally showed his disgusting smile while she carried him, it didn't feel unpleasant. He wouldn't bury his face into her chest and he wouldn't suddenly pant. Why had she always found him scary? Recently, she began to feel that he was sincere and hardworking and didn't want to disrupt him. Janet seemed to share her sentiments. After that, Lilia felt that not to care for him was better. It was an idea that went against common sense. In fact, it was abnormal for a human being to not care for a child that was born not too long ago. But recently, there were signs of knowledge in Rudius' eyes. He showed only chicken eyes a few months back, but at this point, there was a strong will and a dazzling knowledge in them. What should she do? Even though she had a knowledge of taking care of children, the inexperienced Lilia found it hard to discern. She couldn't remember whether it was her guard's maid senpai or her mother's back in her hometown who said this, that there was no correct way to bring up a child. At the very least, she no longer felt disgusted, uncomfortable, or frightened. So she decided it was best to not disturb him and let him revert back to how he was originally. Let's just leave him as he is. Lilia finally concluded. Okay, guys, this is the end of this chapter, chapter number 2 of the volume 1 of Jobless Reincarnation. Hope you all liked it. See you all with the next chapter in the next video. Stay safe and take care.